Okay, I have been trying to figure out the best way to record the presentation, and I can't figure out a way to do it where I can show the things on the screen where it's not blurry, and also myself. So I was just gonna have it over here to the side, and I'll just kind of talk about it, and you can look at it on your screen at the same time. So yes, so I'm doing Wisconsin's budget deficit. And so I wanted to start out with a video kind of explaining how this deficit came to be. Just in general, it is called the dot-com bubble effect, or well, yeah. And so this is one of the issues that occurred that caused the Wisconsin budget. This video is going to be about the dot bubble in general, not specifically like one that caused the Wisconsin budget, but just like when it happens in general. Okay, and there's going to be a link in the second slide for you to watch it. So I guess you can listen to it while I play it on here, or pause me and then watch it on yours, but I'll show it on here. But as you can see, the quality's not super good.
It will be a momentous event for the world and for the U.S. economy, which is closing in on its longest expansion ever. In the late 90s, the dot-com bubble started to grow as the internet became a part of people's daily lives.
No technology in history has ever spread so far, so fast, to so many people.
This is the story of the bubble that people thought would change the rules of economics until it burst, bankrupting most and making billionaires of a select few. As the internet grew, new companies started to emerge within it, mostly online retailers like Pets.com and Amazon. Not all of these companies focused on sound business models, but it didn't matter to investors. They were sucked into the internet excitement and figured that at least one business had to succeed. So they placed their bets and waited.
With the frenzy we've had, to me it feels much more like gambling.
Competition and speculation pushed investors to pay significantly more for dot-com stocks than their fundamental value, which sent IPOs soaring. Mark Cuban's Broadcast.com stock rose from $18 to over $62 during its IPO. Amazon, originally offered at $18 and closed at over $100. Companies like eBay, GeoCities, and Pets.com saw the same unprecedented growth. Overall, the NASDAQ grew from 1,000 points in 1995 to over 5,000 points in 2000, with little inflation. But the difference between perceived value and actual value created a market bubble. And bubbles can only get so big before they pop.
The NASDAQ, once again, do not stare into this index. It is white hot.
On March 10th, 2000, the NASDAQ was worth $6.71 trillion. But the next day, everything changed. The dot-com bubble burst and the market went into a free fall. In less than a month, nearly $1 trillion of stock value deflated. By October 2002, the NASDAQ had lost 78% of its value. Companies whose physical assets couldn't keep up with their once soaring stock prices, like Pets.com, lost millions of dollars and went out of business.
The internet has been pulling us along, and the thing we can take credit for is trying to keep up with it.
A few weeks before the bubble popped, Amazon raised over $600 million. This helped them outlast the economic downturn. With Jeff Bezos' leadership and their rainy day fund, Amazon rose from the rubble to become a global power. Some people fared even better. In 1999, Yahoo acquired Broadcast.com.
We just saw this as a unique opportunity to combine forces with a leading brand on the internet, and that's an opportunity just don't pass up.
Mark Cuban gained $1.7 billion in Yahoo stock. He immediately liquidated it, predicting that the dot-com bubble was about to burst. Today, the dot-com market is steady, but many other markets are emerging. Have investors learned their lesson, or do you think there will be another bubble? Let us know in the comments below, and please like and subscribe.
Okay, so just to kind of go off of what that video was explaining. It's just a summary, and it's something that happens a lot of time before a lot of recessions and crashes, is this lots of investors are kind of honing in on this one thing, and then when it's gone, it just kind of ruins the economy for a bit. And so that one specifically happened around the year 2000, and I'll get to the specific date in a little bit, but and just one thing I wanted to add is that, like, Mark Cuban is now part owner of the Dallas Mavericks, which just kind of shows like how he was able to go from this just kind of millionaire to, as the video kind of explained, a billionaire that is able to continue to hold his investments and his money and to keep making those better decisions. Okay, so moving on to the actual problem of the Wisconsin budget deficit. So if you just go to your next slide, this is slide 3. So when this recession happened, it didn't affect just Wisconsin. I mean, it's a great recession, so it affected all of the United States, but the reason we put focus on the Wisconsin budget deficit is because it was ranked the lowest amongst the other states in America. And something that set this recession apart from other recessions is that previous recessions led to the creation of rainy day funds, kind of how it explained that Jeff Bezos of Amazon had raised $600 million, which was able to make sure that his company didn't go out of business. There rainy day funds created for each state government, but the problem was that Wisconsin created a rainy day fund, but they didn't put anything into it, which defeats the purpose of that. So they had the highest level of fiscal stress. Government's lack of an ability to balance budgets. Wisconsin's general fund budget usually is supposed to be balanced. It's usually supposed to be balanced every year, is how their system works, with odds and even years. This requirement is contained in state statutes rather than in the state's constitution, so there's a little more gray area, and that's why they do it in an odds and evens way, which is another reason why the recession messed them up even worse than it would have, is because of the year that it happened on. It was a year that their budget wasn't where it needed to be. Wisconsin's constitution allows the state to run a deficit in any given year as long as a tax is levied for the ensuing year sufficient with other sources of income to pay the deficiency as well as the estimated expenses of the ensuing year. So kind of what I was just saying, like, their constitution allows the state to run a deficit each year as long as next year they'll be fine. But if they are in that deficit and then the recession happens, they are not able to make up the difference from that year. They just go down into a worse hole. So in summary, like, all of the states did have those problems, but Wisconsin's was worse due to their poor way of budgeting with their and not making a rainy day fund, as well as just the timing, honestly, had a huge effect of just kind of bad luck with their odds and even system. Didn't work out. And so now go to the next slide in key contributors in just the whole of the idea of the Wisconsin budget deficit. In 1987 to 2001, Governor Tommy Thompson was someone that was around for the recession. So the recession happened around 2001. And so when he was governor, he's someone that didn't put anything into the rainy day fund, and so he increase spending a lot and cut taxes, and so it set up the fall that they had their deficit in the recession to be worse than it could have been. And then Governor Scott McCollum came, and he came in 2001, and he was against state and income taxes that would have addressed the state's budget issues. So it made that even worse. And then so their governor was Republican, both Tommy Thompson and Scott McCollum, who both set up this recession, or not set up the recession, but set up this poor budget system so that it was able to fall even worse if a recession were to hit. Were both Republicans, and then the assembly was assembly while Democrats controlled the Senate. And so these differences led to conflict of there being a Democrat Senate as well as a Republican governor, and so they just kind of clashed heads, and it kind of led to not much happening. And then going on to the next slide, talking about remedies proposed and implemented. So one of the huge things that helped begin to, or not help, but one of the things that were implemented to try to fix this was with, going back to slide 4, the second governor, Governor Scott McCollum, tried to fix, was using something called Act 16, which was passed in August of 2001, and it contained 5 major initiatives that I'll just list. The first one was that would be 5% cuts to state agency budgets. Number 2 was delays in staffing new prisons. Number 3 was to use the proceeds from the sale of tobacco settlement agreement revenue bonds. Number 4 was a reallocation of federal transfer revenues to support state medical assistance. And then number 5 was to have high priority programs that to be exempt from budget reductions. These included assistance to the poor, disabled, and the elderly, funding of K through 12 medical assistance, the court system, and public defenders, as well as other things as well. And so the problem with this is that it didn't really work. While it may have helped a little, their deficit was just so big, and I'll get into that number in a second, that it just didn't make a difference enough to really do anything. And so if we move to the next slide, which would be slide 6, progress and solutions, we see the thing that was done to be able to help fix and get Wisconsin out of this deficit, and that was through Governor Jim Doyle, who was the governor of Wisconsin from 2003 to 2011, and he was able to really help them get out of this deficit. Obviously, you can tell Scott McCollum didn't seem to help, as he was from 2001 to 2003, just to kind of remind you. So Jim Doyle, how he was able to help was he implemented this way of helping, saying that during a deficit that lawmakers can have 4 options, rather than being able to just kind of do whatever, or just kind of scrambling to figure out what would happen and how to fix it. And that's kind of what happened in 2001 with Scott McCollum, Governor Scott McCollum, to help fix this, is that there just kind of wasn't order, and it was just like people trying to do whatever they could to fix it. And so Jim Doyle made it a little more organized, that lawmakers can have 4 options, which are that they can raise taxes or cut spending or employ a combination of both, or employ a method of creative bookkeeping. But obviously those are just rather simple, especially because number 3 is just a combination of 1 and 2, but there are certain limitations to both of these. But if you can see, number 3 is just in direct opposition to, if you go back to slide 4, what Governor Tommy Thompson did in his term around 2001 when he was the governor about right before the recession and during. And so adding in my own recommendations would be just like an addition to Jim Doyle's plan is to divide the powers of the Senate and Assembly when deciding the 4 options in order to avoid future problems between Republican and Democrat officials so that progress is not put on standby, which would hopefully help because one of the main concerns was, as I previously mentioned with Scott McCollum and Tommy Thompson, is that there was the Republican governor and then Democratic Senate, and so they're kind of at a standby, and then when the lawmakers kind of had not necessarily free reign, but just didn't have an organized way of doing things, that they would just kind of try things to see what would happen. But with Jim Doyle's plan, they put a limitation on that, and then with my plan or my recommendations, it heightens that limitation to make sure that there's no lulls and there's no just pauses, and make sure that everyone is staying focused and that they're not just butting heads and leading to nothing really going on. And proof of Jim Doyle's fruits was shown as he was taken office, that Wisconsin had a $3.2 billion deficit, and after he implemented these programs as well as others, the state ended the year 2003 when he was added in with a deficit of $2.15 billion. So it's obviously close to an entire $1 billion money raised for Wisconsin to get them higher out of that deficit. And then just to kind of summary here on the last slide, looks like time's running low, but the overall lesson learned is that the state received $1.3 billion out of the $5.4 billion that they would have received if they had waited over the 30-year period. And so when I mean lesson learned, this is more just like consequences. And so if Tommy Thompson and Scott McCollum, but I think mostly Tommy Thompson, didn't focus so much on government spending and cutting taxes, that the state would have been able to receive more money to do the things that he wanted to do. But if they had waited the right amount of time. And so another consequence is that the University of Wisconsin had to announce a halt on undergraduate admissions, which only hurt the economy more for these students as well as these companies that need new employers. And then one thing that I just thought was interesting was that Jim Doyle reminded me of the William Robertson case because of his ability to listen to those around him and his ability to learn lessons from those behind him. Jim Doyle was able to really make his good decisions because of those before him, Scott McCollum and Tommy Thompson. He saw the decisions that they made, not putting money in the rainy day fund, and was able to make changes to that, and then looked forward with potential recessions in mind, as well as trying to get them out of this deficit that they're in. And so the lesson learned, I suppose, is to focus on balancing that budget with having a rainy day fund and using the things that we've learned from that recession, that future recessions are likely to happen, and that things we need to learn from the past by using the problems that other people have had and changing those, and using things like rainy day funds to prepare for the events now. And that is all. Any questions?